Mr President, and my question is to the best Minister for Indigenous Affairs that we've had in generations, Senator Scullion. Can the Minister update the Senate on the government's support for the Indigenous business sector, including through the Indigenous Business Sector Strategy?
Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Scullion.
Mr President, I thank the senator for that question. The initiatives of this government are supporting all hard-working small businesses across Australia. Whilst those opposite oppose our corporate tax cuts, instant asset write-offs, the TPP, and they can't still work out if they're pro-mining or anti-mining, it's becoming painfully clear that it's only a coalition government that stands for small business and Indigenous entrepreneurs. Because we know that Indigenous businesses face additional barriers than the Labor Party to success. Because undercapitalisation that has flowed from a lot of historical policies. So through our Indigenous Business Sector Strategy, which the Prime Minister recently launched, we have a suite of new initiatives to help overcome historical disadvantage and grow the sector to parity rates. Upon our re-election, we launched a $90 million Indigenous Entrepreneurs Fund for Indigenous businesses in remote and regional Australias to apply for capacity-enhancing plant and equipment to grow their businesses. More recently, we announced a $27 million Indigenous Entrepreneurs Capital Scheme, Mr President, which will unlock commercial finance for a more established and mature Indigenous businesses. Mr President, we have also refocused Indigenous Businesses Australia's operations. They're now offering financial products like a new start-up package and a new procurement loan designed to make repayments coincide with an Indigenous Procurement Policy contract. And for those at the very start of the journey in remote areas where accessing a bank is virtually impossible, we're doubling microfinance to help turn CDP activities into micro-businesses. All of these fantastic new initiatives will be brought together in Indigenous business hubs, which will be effectively one-stop shops for all of these services.
Senator O'Sullivan, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister advise how the government's support of the Indigenous business sector is leading to corporate Australia increasing their own engagement with Indigenous businesses?
Senator Scullion.
Clearly, Mr President, our Indigenous procurement policy has been a complete game-changer, with around 1,000 Indigenous businesses across the country winning Commonwealth contracts worth over $1 billion, in its first 2.5 years. Now, that compares, Mr President, to just $6.2 million in 2012-13 under the policies we inherited. What's most pleasing is that the Commonwealth leadership in this space has caused corporate Australia to sit up and take note. During Closing the Gap Week, the Business Council of Australia stood with the Prime Minister, Mr President, and announced that they are introducing a template Indigenous procurement policy for their members to adopt, and I commend them for that. A fantastic commitment that builds on their $356 million their members are already procuring from Indigenous businesses. That's what I'll call a real difference in the lives of the First Nations Australian, and it's this government that's backing them with the right policy.
Senator Scullion. Senator O'Sullivan, final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the Minister explain why supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander small businesses leads to better outcomes for Indigenous communities?
Senator Scullion.
Mr President, clearly backing Indigenous small business is not only positive because we're getting people into small business ownership, but it's also getting more Indigenous job seekers into work. We know that the winning Indigenous businesses winning contracts under the Indigenous Procurement Policy have an average Indigenous workforce of 41%, 60 times the average Indigenous workforce of other Australian businesses, which have workforces of around 0.7%. Now, this is reflected in the results. Since the last census, there's been a 30% increase in the number of Indigenous businesses compared with the last census, and a 23.3% increase in the number of Indigenous Australians in a job. Mr President, our policies are across the board are working. We're getting record numbers of people into jobs, and we're giving some of the most disadvantaged Australians the dignity of work.
Scullion.